beneath the glittering skyline of Singapore, just a few hundred miles away. In the heart of the Bay of Bengal, another world breathes. No skyscrapers, no highways, just rainforest silence, and people who don't seem to belong to this timeline. Their skin, dark like storm-tossed earth. Their eyes, deep, unyielding. Their stature, small, agile, built for forests, not concrete. You could swear they walked out of Central Africa, but they didn't. This is Asia, and these are the Andamanese. Scientists once called them Negritos, a label that said more about colonial assumptions than truth. Because the twist? Genetically, they're not African. Not even close. They're Asian, but not like anyone you've ever seen. They split from the rest of us tens of thousands of years ago, long before pyramids, before cities, before writing itself. Their ancestors took a path no one else did, then vanished into the island fog. And what they carried with them was a genetic code unlike anything on Earth. Not similar, not distant, unique. Mitochondrial markers found nowhere else. Y-DNA that traces not to India, nor China, but to a lineage so rare, it only exists here, and in the shadows of Tibet and ancient Japan. It's as if time bent around them, preserved them, while the rest of us forgot. No Neanderthal legacy, no Denisovan whispers, just the raw imprint of a journey made before memory. The question isn't who they are, it's how. How did they stay hidden, unmixed, unchanged, for over 60,000 years? How did they become a genetic echo, so pure, so untouched? It could rewrite the human story. One thing's certain, their DNA isn't just a map of where we came from. It's a record of what we've lost. But what if this isn't the full story? What if inside their cells is something even older? They shouldn't exist. Not like this. On an island barely a speck on the world map, a few hundred survivors carry something the rest of humanity lost. A flicker, a memory, trapped not in language, not in myth, but in blood. Deep in their cells lie two mitochondrial signatures, M31 and M32, names that mean nothing until you realize these genetic lines are found nowhere else on Earth. Not in Africa, not in Asia, not even among the nearest islanders. Only here, which raises a haunting question. Where did these mothers come from? They didn't arrive. They didn't migrate in. These genes were born here, forged in isolation, sealed off since the Stone Age. Somewhere around 60,000 years ago, a group of humans left the cradle of Africa. They followed the coastlines, watched the tides, crossed rivers, deserts, then vanished into the jungles of the Andaman Islands. And unlike every other tribe, they never left. The rest of us built empires, roads, rockets. They stayed firelit. So when we test their DNA, we're not looking at survivors. We're looking at time travelers, living descendants of the first humans to ever set foot in Asia. Not legends, not stories, evidence. But that's not the part that makes scientists whisper. It's what those genes don't contain. Because locked inside this mitochondrial code is a deeper silence, a hidden absence. Something is missing, or maybe someone. Because these aren't just traces of ancient women. They might be the last markers of a forgotten migration, a mother line erased from every other corner of the world. But why only here? Why didn't the rest of humanity carry them forward? And if these lineages began here, what else could have begun and vanished in the dark forests of these islands? Because these aren't just old genes. They're ghosts. And ghosts always leave unfinished stories. Every human alive today carries ghosts in their blood, echoes of ancient beings we never met, but somehow still know. Neanderthals, Denisovans, two species that vanished, yet live on inside us. Europeans, touched by Neanderthals. Southeast Asians, whispers of Denisovan blood. Even Native Americans carry traces of those archaic sparks. But then there are the Onge, the Jarawa, and in them nothing. No Neanderthal shadows, no Denisovan flickers, just silence. It's as if their bloodlines skipped the haunted hallways of history, untouched by the mixing that shaped the rest of us. At first, scientists thought it was a mistake, a data gap, an error in the sequencing. But the results came back again, and again, pure, pristine, and alone. In a world where everyone is a hybrid, Their genome stands like an untouched ruin, ancient, intact, unmarred. And the irony cuts deep, because this purity wasn't chosen. It was imposed. By geography, by isolation, by 60,000 years of forest silence and monsoon storms, sealing them away from the world's great collisions. Their stories were never written down. Their language, unrelated to any tongue. Their rituals, never photographed. Their gods, never named. Their very existence is a memory no one but them remembers. And yet, that memory is fragile, held together by fewer than 400 souls, drifting between extinction and survival. Some call it a miracle. Others, a genetic time capsule. But there's something about that silence that unsettles. Because if the Onge and Jarawa carry no trace of Neanderthals, no trace of Denisovans, what exactly is hidden in their genome? A blank space, or a presence we haven't named yet? Because sometimes, when a path is empty, it's not because no one walked it. It's because someone else did, long before we arrived. We mapped the genome expecting echoes, old friends like Neanderthals, maybe a whisper of Denisovans. But what we found didn't belong to anyone we know. Inside the blood of the Jarawa and Onge fragments, not African, not Asian, not Neanderthal, not Denisovan, something else, like stumbling across bones in a cave that no fossil record ever mentioned. Except this time, the cave is a living human being. Scientists stared at the data like it was a glitch. These fragments, these sequences, they didn't match anything. Not even ancient dirt-covered genomes from Denisova or Altai. It's not just that the code is old. It's that it's wrong. It belongs to no one. Some called it contamination. Some called it statistical noise. But the signal held. Again, again, again. Tiny relics embedded in the genome, like fossils in amber, from a branch of the human tree no one had ever seen before. A cousin of the Neanderthals. A ghost lineage that split off. Before memory? Before myth? No bones. No artifacts. Just whispers in the double helix. And here's the part that stings the mind. It's not ancient remains we're decoding. It's people. Walking. Laughing. Hunting in the forest. Carrying the bloodline of a species that no longer walks the earth. And maybe never walked anywhere we can find. What if we didn't just find a relic? What if we're looking at the last living link to a human ancestor that history erased? And if they carry this unknown blood, what does that make the rest of us? A remix? A dilution? Or something left behind? But the mystery doesn't end in the DNA. Because when we looked closer at their bones, it got stranger. To the eyes of 19th century explorers, it was simple. Dark skin, curly hair, small frames. Ah, they said, Africans. They drew maps, wrote journals, named them Negritos, little blacks of Asia. But the genome tells another story. Because when the blood was tested, something shattered. These islanders, the Onge, the Jarawa, they aren't African. Not remotely. Their DNA roots run deep into Asia. Deeper than empires. Deeper than any map dares to show. Same look, different soul. This is the power of convergent evolution. The body adapting to heat, forest, hunger. Different people, same solution. Like two artists painting the same shape, with different brushes. The African pygmy and the Andaman hunter, side by side. They look like brothers. But inside they're strangers. And the myth of sameness? It was a cage, built by colonizers who couldn't see past skin. They saw resemblance and assumed inheritance. But the truth was far older, far lonelier. These traits, the hair, the build, the melanin, they didn't come from Africa. They came from this soil, this heat, this endless green. The Andamanese didn't carry African legacy. They carried their own. And that face, so often misread, mislabeled, became a kind of shield, a cloak of invisibility. The colonizers couldn't comprehend them, so they ignored them. But misunderstanding isn't protection. And when the world finally looked closer, it was almost too late, because something had been lost. Quietly, generation by generation, what looked like strength was masking a terrible cost, because the very features that kept them apart were hiding what was happening inside, in their blood, in their genes. An invisible collapse, slowly, irrevocably sealing their fate. Because survival, in their case, came with a genetic curse. Imagine a tree, ancient, wild, but with branches that circle back in on themselves. No new shoots, no new seeds, just repetition. Now imagine that tree is a family. The Onge, the Jarawa. For tens of thousands of years, their roots were untouched. But isolation doesn't just protect, it also prunes. Their genome, when scanned, doesn't sprawl like others. It loops. Long runs of sameness. Markers repeating like echoes in a canyon. This is genetic drift. The slow, silent erosion of diversity. One mutation lost here. One allele fixed there. In small populations, randomness becomes destiny. And over time, the tree forgets how to grow new limbs. Scientists call it a bottleneck, but for these tribes, it's a trap. A past so narrow, it boxed in the future. FST values, the measures of difference, aren't just high. They're off the charts. No tribe, no people, sits so far from everyone else. But that difference comes at a cost. Because when every cousin is also your sibling, and every neighbor your double, the genome loses its resilience. Illness doesn't get diluted, it amplifies. Immunity weakens. Vital traits vanish in the shuffle of sameness. One virus, one wound, can cut through a community like fire through dry leaves. And it shows. In their fragility. In the echo of disease that colonial ships left behind. But inside that fragility is something else. Because while the world changed, folded into empires and engines, their genome stayed still. Untouched. Unmixed, unmoved, a time capsule, locked by accident, opened only now. While the rest of us became mosaics, they became mirrors, reflecting a version of us that no longer exists. And in that frozen reflection, they held on to something the rest of us buried beneath migrations, wars, and noise. Something pure, something ancient, something we thought was lost. Yet they preserved something no one else did. Across 3 corners of Asia, islands, mountains, and archipelagos, a single thread pulses beneath the skin. A code, not shared by many, only a few, scattered like whispers from a forgotten loom. The Tibetan monk on a windswept plateau, the Ainu fisherman staring into the northern sea, and the Jarawa, barefoot in Andaman rainforest. All carry it. Y-DNA haplogroup D1A3. A paternal lineage that doesn't follow maps. Doesn't obey logic. You won't find it in Delhi, or Bangkok, or Manila. Only in the margins, the quiet, the untouched, the nearly lost. It's like tracing a story that no longer has a beginning, just fragments of a sentence, etched into blood. Scientists call it a deep branch, a relic. But to those who carry it, it's memory. A father's 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 father, reaching back to a time before time. The Andamanese didn't inherit this from nearby neighbors. The Nicobarese, just south of them, carry O2A, a lineage rooted in mainland Southeast Asia, common, familiar. But D1A3 doesn't belong here or there. It's an orphaned lineage, too old to track, too rare to categorize. It raises a question that science isn't ready to answer. How can a tribe isolated for 60,000 years share blood with people separated by oceans and mountains? What kind of journey weaves such a fragile, precise thread across Japan, Tibet, and a jungle island no empire could tame? Is it a signal of an ancient migration? A whisper from the first wave of humans? Or something stranger, something left behind on purpose? Because this isn't just about where the blood has traveled. It's about where it started. And that's the question pulling everything apart. If these people are the end of the thread, then where did it begin? It starts with a mystery no one saw coming. A question swallowed by waves. How did they get here? The Andaman Islands, isolated, jagged, wrapped in reefs. A place no bridge has ever touched. Yet someone arrived. Not by accident. Not blown off course. They came with intent and stayed. 60,000 years ago, the world looked different. Sea levels were lower. Land stretched longer. Coastlines connected what now seems impossible. But not entirely. Even then, the Andamans were cut off. A stretch of open water separating them from the Asian mainland. Which means the first humans here didn't walk. They sailed. Long before Egypt built pyramids. Long before anyone dared cross open sea, someone built something that floated. And they crossed. They brought fire, tools, stories, maybe even pigs, whose bones turn up in places they shouldn't. Linguists find echoes in the Nicobar Islands, Austroasiatic syllables, tied to tribes in Laos, Vietnam, Malaysia. But here's the twist: those are migrants. The Nicobarese arrived just 4,000, maybe 5,000 years ago. Latecomers, the Andamanese, were already here. Originals, the first. So while we study trade routes and chola fleets, the real mariners, the forgotten sailors, were hunter-gatherers with no compass, no maps, just memory and sky. And yet, something feels off, because you'd think the world would remember them. The first sea crossers, the boldest migration. But their stories? Gone. Not written. Not sung. Not carved in stone. Only held in silence, in genetics, in fading traditions whispered to no one. Why? Why do the ones who got here first have no monument? Why do the original voices fade, while the migrants' names remain? What erased their journey from the world's memory? Then why do their stories vanish from history? It didn't take a war. No conquest. No battle. Just arrival, dressed in uniforms and flags. When the British came to the Andaman Islands, they didn't see civilizations. They saw space. Room for a penal colony. A prison in paradise. They built cells in the jungle. Fortresses where the wind once carried only song. And in that silence, something began to unravel. There were 13 great Andamanese tribes once, each with its own language, its own gods, its own sky. Now, there are 3. And even that number lies, because the languages are dying. One woman, alone in a hut, speaking words no one else understands, singing to ghosts who will never answer back. She's not a poet. She's a dictionary in human skin. And when she goes, an entire worldview disappears with her. But language wasn't all that was lost. They brought disease, the kind that doesn't need permission. Measles, influenza, viruses that moved faster than bullets ever could. Bodies fell. Whole villages gone in weeks. And the survivors? Their bloodline bent. Outsider men came ashore, soldiers, laborers, traders. And slowly, the ancient male line was replaced. Not violently, not quickly, but inevitably. When scientists scanned the Y-DNA of the great Andamanese today, what they found wasn't D1A3. It was India. It was Asia. It was everything except what should have been there. The ancient male lineage had been overwritten, like a script scratched out, rewritten in someone else's hand. The genes may still echo in the mitochondria, the maternal line, but the paternal code? It's fading. Not just in labs, in lives. Because you can sequence DNA, but you can't resurrect a worldview. You can record a language, but you can't revive a silence. The body may endure. The blood may pass, but the stories, the spirit, the DNA may survive, but the culture is on life support. There are no scrolls, no stone carvings, no written archives passed down. And yet, their blood remembers everything. Inside the genome of the Andamanese, deep within those spirals of ancient code, lie alleles preserved nowhere else on Earth. Not in India, not in Africa, not in any modern population. Alleles like trapped sparks, frozen in time, untouched by the storms of empire and agriculture and industry. What scientists found felt impossible. Whole genome analysis revealed sequences so rare, they might predate the rise of language itself. They call it a frozen genome. Not because it stopped, but because the world around it didn't. While every other human population moved, mixed, migrated, the Onge, the Jarawa, the Sentinelese stayed. And in that stillness, something was preserved. Genes that speak of ancient bodies, small, agile, perfectly tuned to rainforest life. Stature regulated not by malnutrition, but by evolution. Insular dwarfism, born from millennia of tight ecologies and hard survival. Genes that whisper of tropical climate, melanin, sweat glands, muscle fibers adapted for endurance, not excess. And tied to those genes are rituals. A way of walking the forest, of speaking to animals, of sharing silence without fear. Oral histories passed not for poetry, but precision. Memories carried in voice, like arrows in a quiver. Because when your DNA is an archive, every choice becomes legacy. But here's the question we never ask. What does it mean to carry the memory of humanity's first journey? To walk with the fire of the first out-of-Africa migration still burning in your cells? To be a living map while the rest of the world forgets the route? And if this is what survival looks like, what did the world lose in becoming modern? Because while their blood carries history, not all the islanders share that legacy. 2 islands, 1 chain, but stories centuries apart. On one side, the Nicobarese, farmers, traders, voices that echo across Southeast Asia. Their genes familiar, their languages connected, a tapestry woven from migration and cultivation and rhythm. They came with pigs, with seeds, with stories shared across waters and rice fields. Their roots, Austroasiatic, recent by deep time standards, a few thousand years old, and very much like us. Modern, mapped, belonging, but just north of silence. The Andamanese, no plow, no script, no close cousins. Their blood doesn't connect to kingdoms or trade routes. It reaches deeper, to a time when humans hadn't named rivers, hadn't split gods from fire. They are not recent arrivals. They are the memory, a mirror to what we once were, when the world was young, and the genome was still learning to carry us forward. And now, these 2 worlds stand side by side, one with the future written in policy and integration, the other fading, not because of weakness, but because of time, because of neglect, because the modern world doesn't know how to read what's been hidden in plain sight. The Nicobarese will continue, anchored by connections, but the Andamanese, if they vanish, it won't just be a people lost. It will be the last living chapter of our first story erased. Because they are not just a tribe. They are a timestamp, a genetic lighthouse, flickering on the edge of extinction. And if their DNA disappears, so does our first memory. What other ancient genomes lie hidden, waiting to speak?